Hello, my name is Rachel. I am a seminarian in Philly, which means that I am studying and in the process of becoming a pastor someday. So I am really grateful to be with you and to be able to be a part of your camp this summer. Thanks for having me. For everything, there is a season. That is a phrase that I've heard a lot growing up in the church and being in the church. For everything, there is a season, which is a really nice sentiment when we're talking about for everything, there is a season for planting and harvesting and dancing and celebrating. That's a fun concept. We all like to have seasons of celebration and happiness and joy. And it becomes a little bit less fun when we're talking about the pieces of there being a time to mourn and a time to cry, a time to grieve, a time to remember. That's a little bit more somber, and that's what the holidays that we're talking about today are about. They're more somber holidays. Halloween, granted, looks a little different in the context of the US. It is more celebratory and joyful, but it comes out of this different context, this different place. So I wonder how we mark these times for ourselves. What's interesting is that all of those holidays, Dia de los Muertos, All Hallows Eve, All Saints Day, and all of the different ways that we talk about this in general, all happen at around the same time of year. At the end of October, early November, October 31st, November 1st, we have these moments where different cultures around the world have different holidays and practices to remember the dead. And there is sort of this cross-cultural belief that at that time of year, the spirit world and the material world are somehow closer together. And different religions conceive of that differently, different cultures understand that differently. But it's really interesting to think that across the world, there have been people grieving and mourning and remembering their beloved ones who are gone all around the same time of year. I think that's pretty interesting. And the holiday that I'm most familiar with, other than Halloween, which I grew up doing, but again, doesn't have a ton of religious significance anymore. So the one that I'm most familiar with is Dia de los Muertos, which if you've ever seen like the movie Coco, maybe you know what I'm talking about, you have a better idea. Or maybe some of you practice some sort of Dia de los Muertos traditions in your own home. I know Dia de los Muertos because I studied abroad in Ecuador, and that was my first time experiencing something like that. And it's a holiday that happens right around that time of year again, and it was so beautiful and so interesting to see my host family participate in that. And they made special foods, and people all over Quito, the city where I was living and studying, were participating in this. So I would go into like bakeries that I had been going to every day or every week, and they had pan de muerto, which was this these little breads that are sort of like doll shaped. They've got like a little head and then a little body, and they have icing decorating them, giving them like a little face and a little outfit, and they're all different, and you bite into them and they're filled with raspberry jelly which is really funny because it looks a little like blood when you eat it. And my mom came to visit me that week that Dia de los Muertos was happening, and she was horrified at how like grotesque and visceral it was, but it was just totally normal, and like people laughed and sort of joked about it. But the idea of talking about death, the idea of talking about the reality that human life as we know and experience it ends at some point, wasn't a scary thing there. And this point in time, that week, was a time to celebrate the people who had died already, the people who were lost to us, physically at least, and to remember them and to mourn the fact that they were gone. So there were these special foods, there were memorials around the city, and the most intimate part of the celebration was that families would prepare special foods and the like favorite foods of people that they were remembering, and they would go to the cemetery with their foods, and they would set out a picnic right in front of the graves of the people who they were remembering, and they would sit there with their family and have a picnic. It was just, I think, really, really beautiful that you take the time to go and remember and be together with people who know what it's like to miss somebody. And even family members who were long gone, who maybe you never met, or they only met when they were a baby, they would still take the time to tell those stories and to remember that and sort of practice that communal memory, which was just really beautiful. And then after I graduated college, I moved to Mexico, and I lived in Mexico City for a while, and that was also a really big holiday there. And that was a much more colorful celebration than it was in Ecuador, and they had different foods that they made and different specific practices. In Mexico, a lot of families make altars for Dia de los Muertos, and they have pictures or art of their ancestors who they're remembering, and they set them up on this big altar, and they put out different foods that they liked and different traditional prints and things like that. And it was so, so beautiful. And marigolds, the flower marigolds, are a big symbol of Dia de los Muertos. And so a lot of people would take marigolds and they would take all the petals off of the flowers and like put a line of flower petals all the way around their home. Just this gold and orange petal lining, I guess, of their homes. It was so beautiful. And in the Zocalo, the city center, there were different altars set up to different kinds of people. There were ones dedicated to artists. There were ones dedicated to musicians, to historical figures, to women. It was just so cool to see. And then at the shelter that I worked at, when I was living in Mexico, I worked at a shelter for Central American migrants and refugees who were making their way through Mexico on their way to the U.S. from Central America. And it's a really dangerous journey, and it's a really scary thing to do. And a lot of people don't make it. A lot of migrants end up dying on the way. And so we, at our shelter, outside on the street, we built a huge altar for migrants who had lost their lives on their way, on their journeys. And so we had pictures of people who we knew hadn't survived, and we also had a bunch of little white crosses that we had up there to represent all of the people whose names we don't know, whose stories we don't know, but who we know and want to celebrate and want to remember. And it was a really, really powerful experience, because I think that my life, at least growing up, my family didn't really make time to mourn, or any sort of, other than funerals, any collective moment to celebrate all of the people who came before us and all of the people that we miss and we wish were here. But I think it's really important that we do that, because we do need to take that time and to feel those hard feelings, because for everything there is a season, and we know that humans don't function as well when we don't have the time to process. And we hear that in the story of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. Lazarus was one of Jesus's best friends. He was the brother of Mary and Martha, who were also good friends of Jesus. And when Jesus found out that Lazarus was sick, he didn't come right away. He came later, and he came and he knew that Lazarus had died. And when he saw Mary and Martha weeping and grieving, the Bible says Jesus wept. It's a whole verse. Just those two words, Jesus wept, is a whole Bible verse. And I think that even just that symbolism, that there's an entire verse just dedicated to the fact that Jesus cried, is really, really powerful. Because this is God. This is God weeping, right? God knows what it's like to lose somebody. God knows what it's like to feel deep sadness and to mourn. And even God, who ostensibly knows everything, right? Jesus, who is on his way to raise Lazarus from the dead, who knows that that's his next step, right? Even Jesus in that moment pauses and cries. And he lets himself feel these big emotions, and not only feel them, but express them, right? He doesn't just feel sad inside and hide it away from everyone. He weeps other people. And I think that's really important, because if God needs to do it, so do we. We have to take time for that, to respect and honor our grief. And it isn't just grief about death. There's all sorts of different kinds of grief that we experience. We lose all sorts of different kinds of things. And I think that we, especially right now, know what it's like to grieve and mourn and feel the loss of things that aren't just life, that are life, but are not just life, right? Classes we were excited to be able to take in person that are online now, or graduations that we didn't get to go to, or birthday parties with family or friends, and all sorts of things that we don't have anymore. Not to mention the collective grief and mourning of Black lives that we've been having in this country. And it's incredibly important that we take the time to feel these things and to express these things as one people, all together. God knows, God knew what was going to happen, and yet God wept. God had hope, and yet God still felt sad. So it's okay if you feel sad too. It's all right if you need to cry. In fact, it's a really good and healthy thing to express these feelings. We need the same things. We're made in the image of God. So if Jesus can take time to stop and weep, so can we. And if Jesus can remember and celebrate the life of his friends, so can we. Take your time. Do what you need to do. And let's maybe put a little more effort into some of the celebrations that we have, if they aren't already ingrained in our families or cultures, to take a minute and really express what we need to be feeling. For everything, there is a season. Even this.